Butts County, Georgia, 2020. Inside the Special Management Unit, the most secure section of a Georgia state prison, an inmate sits in his cell holding a contraband cell phone. He dials a number. When someone answers, he does not identify himself as Arthur Lee Cofield Jr., prisoner number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, serving 14 years for armed robbery. Instead, he says he is Sidney Kimmel, billionaire fashion mogul, film producer, philanthropist, worth over $1.8 billion. And they believe him. Within weeks, $11 million will move from one of the most secure financial accounts in America into the hands of a man who is not supposed to have access to anything beyond prison commissary. 6,100 American Eagle gold coins, a $4.4 million mansion in Buckhead, a private plane waiting on a tarmac. This is the story of the largest financial fraud ever executed from inside a United States prison. And here is what nobody saw coming. He almost got away with it. Let us be clear about what Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. represents. This is not a story about a criminal mastermind who planned his life of crime from childhood. This is a story about adaptation, about what happens when someone with intelligence and ambition finds themselves trapped in a system with nothing but time. Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. The details of his early life remain relatively private, but what we know is this. By his early 20s, he had made choices that would alter the trajectory of his entire existence. In 2012, at an age when most people are just starting their careers, just figuring out who they want to be, Cofield was sentenced to 14 years in prison for armed robbery. 14 years. Think about that time frame. That's longer than most people stay at any job. That's longer than many marriages last. That's enough time to get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD with time left over. But here's the thing about prison. It doesn't pause your mind. It doesn't stop your ambition. If anything, it sharpens it. When you are locked in a cell for 23 hours a day with nothing but your thoughts, you have two choices. Let the system break you or find a way to beat it from the inside. Cofield chose option 2. By 2019, Cofield had been incarcerated for 7 years. 7 years of watching the world change through letters, through contraband newspapers, through whispered conversations about the outside. 7 years of watching other inmates come and go. 7 years of understanding that when he eventually got out, the world would not be waiting for him with opportunities. He would be a convicted felon in his 30s, starting from zero, unless he changed the game entirely. Here is what makes this different from every other prison fraud case you have heard about. Cofield did not hack into computer systems from prison. He did not have accomplices smuggle in laptops or sophisticated technology. His weapon was simpler, more elegant, and already inside the prison walls: contraband cell phones. Picture this. In prisons across America, cell phones are currency. They are worth more than drugs, more than weapons, more than anything else you can smuggle inside. A single smartphone can go for thousands of dollars in commissary, credits, or cash payments to outside accounts. They represent connection to the outside world, to family, to business, to freedom. But most inmates use these phones for basic communication, calling loved ones, coordinating with lawyers, maybe conducting small-scale drug deals or fraud schemes. Cofield saw something different. He saw an entire financial system that operated on voice verification and personal information. He saw a vulnerability that no one else had exploited. Around 2019 to 2020, while locked in the Special Management Unit, Georgia's highest security prison environment designed to house the most dangerous or escape-prone inmates, Cofield began his research. The mathematics are simple. If you can convince someone you are who you say you are, you can access that person's wealth. But the execution, That's where genius, or in this case, criminal genius, comes into play. Cofield chose his target carefully. Sidney Kimmel, billionaire founder of Jones Apparel Group, film producer behind movies like The Kite Runner and Moneyball, philanthropist who had donated hundreds of millions to cancer research and education, a man with so much money across so many accounts that $11 million might not be immediately noticed. But here's what nobody saw coming. Cofield did not just pick a random rich person and try to impersonate them. He studied Kimmel's life like a doctoral thesis: birth dates, social security information, account numbers, security questions, mother's maiden name, first pet, elementary school attended, all the seemingly random pieces of information that financial institutions use to verify identity. Where did he get this information? That remains partially mysterious. Some of it may have come from data breaches that were being sold on dark web forums, accessible through smartphones. Some of it may have come from social engineering, calling various institutions claiming to be Kimmel or his representatives, gathering pieces of the puzzle one call at a time. Some of it may have come from public records, news articles, interviews, the digital breadcrumbs that billionaires leave across the internet. By early 2020, Cofield had assembled a complete identity. He was not pretending to be Sidney Kimmel. In the eyes of every verification system, every security protocol, every identity check, he was Sidney Kimmel. Now came the execution. Charles Schwab, one of the largest and most respected brokerage firms in America, billions of dollars in assets under management, multiple layers of security, identity verification protocols designed by some of the best minds in financial security. And Cofield breached it with a phone call. Here is the thing about financial security. In 2020, it is designed to protect against hackers, against malware, against sophisticated technical attacks, but it is not designed to protect against someone who can answer every security question correctly, who has every piece of personal information, who sounds confident and legitimate because they practiced this conversation hundreds of times in their cell. The first call was reconnaissance. Cofield, speaking as Kimmel, contacted Charles Schwab to verify his account information. He provided his social security number. He answered security questions. He established rapport with the representatives. Everything checked out because he had the real information. The second call was setup. He explained that he needed to restructure some investments. Nothing unusual. Wealthy clients move money around all the time. He asked about the process for large transfers. He gathered information about what would be required. The third call was execution. $11 million to be transferred from Kimmel's Schwab account to an account he controlled under a shell company name. Think about this for a second. $11 million is not a small transaction that might slip through unnoticed. That is the kind of money that should trigger every possible alarm. Multiple people should be verifying. Managers should be signing off. Security should be triple checking. But when you have all the right answers, when you pass every verification check, when you sound like exactly who you claim to be, the system says yes. The money moved. Here is what nobody saw coming. Cofield understood that stealing $11 million digitally was only half the battle. Money in a bank account can be frozen, traced, recovered. He needed to convert it into something physical, something that could be moved, hidden, spent without leaving the same digital trail. Gold. 6,100 American Eagle gold coins. Each one contained 1 troy ounce of pure gold. At 2020 prices, roughly $11 million worth of value that could fit in a few large suitcases. This is where the operation expanded beyond the prison walls. Cofield had spent years building relationships with people on the outside. Family members, friends from before incarceration, associates who were willing to take massive risks for a massive payday. The conspiracy now involved multiple people, multiple moving parts, and multiple ways for things to go wrong. But here is where the story gets audacious. The gold was delivered. 6,000 coins were delivered to locations around Atlanta. Associates picked them up, and then they started spending. Not small amounts, not careful, under the radar purchases. They went big. A $4.4 million home in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhoods. Under an alias, naturally. But a massive, unmissable transaction that required lawyers, inspectors, title companies, banks. The kind of purchase that creates dozens of witnesses and hundreds of documents. A private plane chartered to move assets around the country. Because when you have stolen $11 million in gold, why not move it in style? This is where criminal psychology becomes fascinating. Cofield and his associates had successfully pulled off one of the most sophisticated frauds in American history. They had turned $11 million in digital money into physical gold. They had hundreds of coins worth thousands of dollars each that could be sold slowly over time, laundered through legitimate businesses, converted into a comfortable life. But they got greedy. They got flashy. They stopped thinking like criminals trying to avoid detection and started thinking like newly wealthy people entitled to spend their money. And that is when the walls started closing in. Charles Schwab's security systems, despite being breached initially, were not completely asleep. Sophisticated algorithms monitor accounts for unusual activity. An $11 million transfer from a billionaire's account to an unknown shell company is unusual. The flags went up. Not immediately. Cofield had managed to bypass the initial security checks, but within days, human analysts were reviewing the transaction. Phone records were being pulled, call recordings were being analyzed, and here's where the mathematics of criminal investigation come into play. The calls had come from phone numbers. Those numbers had location data. That location data pointed to Central Georgia, more specifically to an area containing several state prison facilities. The IP addresses from any data usage on those phones were the same location, Central Georgia, prison territory. The FBI entered the investigation. So did the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, because $11 million in undeclared stolen income is very much their jurisdiction. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia began building a case, but they had a problem. They knew the fraud had been committed from prison. They even had a good idea which facility, but proving exactly who had made those calls, who had access to the contraband phones, who had the knowledge and connections to pull this off, required more work. So they watched, they surveilled, they followed the gold. The associates outside the prison, Eldridge Bennett Sr. and Eldridge Bennett Jr., among others, were easier to track. They were the ones actually handling physical assets. They were the ones meeting with real estate agents, jewelers, gold dealers. They were the ones whose faces appeared on security cameras, whose signatures appeared on documents. The investigators traced the gold coins. They identified the shell companies. They mapped out the network of transactions. They built a timeline that showed exactly how $11 million had flowed from one of the most secure financial accounts in America into the hands of a prison inmate's criminal network. And then they moved. Federal raids are designed to be overwhelming. Multiple locations hit simultaneously. Doors breached, assets seized, suspects taken into custody before they have time to destroy evidence or flee. The associates on the outside were arrested. The $4.4 million mansion purchase was blocked. The gold coins, those that had not already been sold or hidden, were recovered. Bank accounts were frozen. Every piece of the criminal infrastructure that Cofield had built from his prison cell was systematically dismantled. And inside the Special Management Unit in Butts County, investigators came for Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. The contraband phones were seized, records were pulled, every call he had made, every text he had sent, every piece of the puzzle was now evidence. The charges were stacked like a house of cards. Wire fraud, using electronic communications to commit fraud across state lines. Each phone call could be a separate count. Each conversation with Charles Schwab representatives could be a separate crime. Money laundering, the deliberate conversion of $11 million from digital form to physical gold, then attempting to convert it again into real estate and other assets. Multiple transactions, multiple violations. Identity theft, impersonating Sidney Kimmel, using his personal information without authorization, accessing his financial accounts. Federal identity theft carries the serious penalties, especially when the amounts involved reach into the millions. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud, working with multiple co-defendants to defraud a financial institution. RICO-adjacent charges that could tie him to every action taken by every member of the conspiracy. The math? Cofield was already serving 14 years for armed robbery. These new federal charges carry potential sentences measured in decades. Plural. We are talking about the possibility of dying in prison. Let us be clear about what this case represents beyond just one clever criminal. This is a story about systemic failures at multiple levels of American institutions. First, prison security. The Special Management Unit is supposed to be maximum security. It is designed to house the most. These were the dangerous, most escape-prone inmates in Georgia's prison system. And yet contraband cell phones were readily available. Not just one phone, Cofield likely had access to multiple devices over months or years. That represents a complete breakdown in contraband interdiction. Think about this. If an inmate in maximum security can get cell phones, what else is getting in? Drugs? Weapons? What other crimes are being coordinated from inside what are supposed to be secure facilities? The Georgia Department of Corrections, like prison systems across America, faces a crisis of contraband phones. They are small, valuable, and increasingly sophisticated. They can be thrown over fences, smuggled in by corrupt staff, hidden in the legal documents. The problem is not unique to Georgia. It is a national epidemic. But this case proves just how dangerous that epidemic can be. Second, financial security protocols. Charles Schwab is not some small-time brokerage firm. They manage trillions of dollars. They employ hundreds of security professionals. They have multiple layers of identity verification designed by experts. And an inmate with a cell phone and stolen personal information breached all of it. Here is what that means. If your security is based primarily on personal information, social security numbers, mother's maiden names, security questions, then your security is only as good as that information remains secret. In an age of massive data breaches, of personal information being sold on dark web forums, of social engineering attacks, that model is fundamentally broken. Financial institutions are now scrambling to implement biometric verification, fingerprints, facial recognition, voice analysis that goes beyond simple recording playback. But Cofield's case proved that the old model of security question verification is dangerously inadequate. Third, the victim experience. Sidney Kimmel, a 76-year-old billionaire philanthropist, suddenly discovered that someone had stolen $11 million from his account. Not through hacking, not through a technical breach, but by literally pretending to be him so convincingly that his own financial institutions could not tell the difference. That is not just financial crime. That is a violation of identity, of security, of the basic assumption that your money in a major brokerage account is safe. Kimmel had done everything right. He had chosen a reputable firm. He had secure accounts. He presumably followed all recommended security practices, and he was still victimized. The emotional impact of that kind of violation goes beyond the dollar amount. When you are worth $1.8 billion, $11 million is recoverable. But the sense of vulnerability, of wondering what other accounts might be compromised, of questioning whether your identity is truly secure, is priceless in the worst way. As of the most recent court filings, the case against Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. and his co-conspirators continues to work through the federal system. Some associates have already been sentenced. The Bennett family members took plea deals, accepting significant prison time rather than risking trial. But Cofield's case, the mastermind, the one who orchestrated everything from a prison cell, is proceeding more slowly. Federal prosecutors are building the most comprehensive case possible. They want to ensure that every charge sticks, that every piece of evidence is airtight, that there is no possibility of appeal or reversal. Because here's the thing about federal prosecutions. They have a conviction rate over 90%. When the feds decide to indict you, they have usually already built a case that is nearly impossible to beat. The question is not whether you will be convicted. The question is whether you will take a plea deal or force them to prove it at trial. For Cofield, the calculus is brutal. He is already serving 14 years for armed robbery. His earliest possible release date would have been in the mid-2020s, putting him back on the streets in his 40s with a chance to rebuild some kind of life. Now, even with a plea deal, he's looking at decades in federal prison, multiple consecutive sentences for multiple federal crimes, the possibility of dying behind bars, the complete elimination of any hope for freedom in his natural lifetime. The cycle continues. The system continues. A man who was already trapped found a way to commit crimes from inside his cage, and now that cage will hold him until he's elderly or dead. This case should terrify both prison administrators and financial institutions. Because here's what Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. proved. Physical incarceration is not enough to stop sophisticated crime. As long as inmates have access to communication technology and time to plan, they can coordinate operations that rival anything happening on the streets. Traditional financial security based on personal information is broken. In an age of data breaches and social engineering, we need fundamentally new approaches to identity verification. The weakest link in any security system is human judgment. The Charles Schwab representatives who processed these transactions weren't incompetent, they weren't corrupt, they were following protocols, checking boxes, verifying information. And they were still deceived. Cofield's case has already sparked changes. Prisons are investing in phone jamming technology, in body scanners that can detect contraband, and enhanced prosecution of anyone caught smuggling phones to inmates. Financial institutions are implementing biometric verification, multi-factor authentication that goes beyond simple questions and passwords. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There will be another Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. Maybe not with the exact same scheme, but someone will find the next vulnerability, the next exploit, the next way to turn a prison cell into a command center for financial crime. Because the system that creates these vulnerabilities, mass incarceration, that gives intelligent criminals nothing but time, financial security based on outdated models, prison conditions that make contraband valuable enough to risk everything for. That system isn't changing fast enough. Think about the intelligence required to pull this off. Think about the planning, the research, the social engineering, the coordination across multiple people and institutions. Think about the psychological skills required to convincingly impersonate a billionaire, to manipulate financial representatives, to maintain operational security across months of preparation and execution. Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. could have been anything. With that level of intelligence and determination, he could have earned a legitimate fortune. He could have built businesses, created value, made a real impact on the world. Potential. Instead, he is facing life in federal prison. His co-conspirators are serving years or decades. The gold is gone. The mansion was never occupied. The money is being returned to its rightful owner. And all that brilliance, all that potential, accomplished nothing except guaranteeing that he will die in a cage. That is not justice celebrated. That is not criminal behavior glorified. That is tragedy wrapped in federal charges. This is the story of the $11 million phone call. A fraud so sophisticated, it exposed fundamental weaknesses in both our prison system and our financial infrastructure. A crime committed by a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, who bet everything on one elaborate con, and who ultimately proved that even from inside the most secure prison in Georgia, with nothing but a contraband phone and stolen information, you can almost steal $11 million from a billionaire. 11 million almost means nothing in the federal criminal justice system. Close does not count. You either get away with it completely or you spend the rest of your life paying for it. Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. did not get away with it. And now the only thing he will be spending is time. Decades of it. He will serve that time in a cell even more secure than the one he used to orchestrate this scheme. The mathematics are simple. He stole $11 million. He'll pay with his life. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. In this game, you either die or go to prison. There's no retirement package. There's no getting out ahead. The house always wins. Always. If this story taught us anything, it's that our systems, both corrections and financial, have vulnerabilities we're only beginning to understand. And somewhere right now, someone else is studying those vulnerabilities, planning the next heist, looking for the next exploit. The game continues. The cycle continues. The only question is whether we'll fix these systems before the next Arthur Lee Cofield Jr. finds an even bigger vulnerability to exploit. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into cases that expose the fault lines in American institutions. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story that proves truth is always stranger than fiction. Until next time, stay aware, stay secure, and remember, if someone calls claiming to be you, maybe they actually know more about you than they should.